Joining us now is retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. He also served as the former Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs under George W. Bush. General, I do want to ask you, we have some sound from Marco Rubio about putting ground troops into this conflict. I want you to listen to that really quickly.
We're going to destroy their factories that make missiles and rockets and drones. We're going to destroy their Navy. We're going to destroy their Air Force. And we are going to significantly destroy their missile launchers so they can never hide behind these things to get a nuclear weapon. We are achieving all those objectives. We are ahead of schedule on most of them. And we can achieve them without any ground troops.
All right, without any ground troops, do you think it's clear that the U.S. can achieve those goals? What are those goals, and can they do it without ground forces?
Well, first of all, to answer your question, I think they can do most, if not all of that, without ground forces. If they're talking about hard destruction of missile sites, of discovered nuclear sites, and their Navy. If, on the other hand, they want to conduct short-term operations to, say, go against their speedboats that have been so effective in the past, and we saw in Yemen with the sinking of the USS Cole by the speedboats, that may take troops on the ground for a short period of time. And, of course, the Kharg Island question begs the question if we're going to have to put ground troops there.
That begs the question, how are you thinking about that at this point in time? So it's something the administration has floated. The president's been a bit coy about whether or not it's something that he might pursue. At this point, as we approach the 5-week mark here in this conflict, does it make strategic sense for you, for the U.S. to get involved in taking Kharg Island?
Well, listen, I think it may make sense to take Kharg Island if we can't get through the Strait of Hormuz, or if Iran sets up the toll booth, as they say they're going to do. I just don't think it necessarily needs to be done with ground troops. In fact, I think ground troops is probably the worst option of all, because obviously we'd have troops at risk. We'd have Iran firing at those troops, probably destroying some of the infrastructure. I think we've got to ask, what is the purpose of taking Kharg Island? And that is to put the oil terminals at risk. Well, the fact is we could very well do that with a cyber attack on the electricity that pumps that oil into the ships. We could go against some of the pipes as well. I would say the best way to do this is by a short-term, quickly reversible mission that allows us to control the pumping going into those tankers rather than put Americans on the ground.
Something you said there might be key, and that's quickly reversible, because one of the things that military as well, but diplomatic folks are really concerned about is the fact that if the U.S. destroys Iran's infrastructure and economy, you are less likely to get a functional regime that can support the goals of a potentially democratic Iranian people if they can't support their own economy. If you destroy their infrastructure, their oil infrastructure, you're going to have a failed state there. So you think that something like a computer virus or like a cyber attack would be better because that is easily reversible? That's something you can claw back when you need to?
Yeah, you got it. I think we have the ability to disrupt for periods of time the flow of oil into those tankers. Like you said, I want it to be reversible so that at the time we've achieved our military objectives and our strategic objectives, we can turn that back on for the good of the Iranian people primarily.
I want to ask you about the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. We've talked about this a bit on the show over the course of the morning. You had the president saying he intended to pause prospective strikes on energy infrastructure, power infrastructure in Iran. And then not even 24 hours after that, we saw Israel going after some of those sites. What does that tell you about the level of coordination here, and I guess more broadly speaking, about the way these two countries, these two allies, see the war going directionally from here on out?
Look, I think we've got to understand that countries act in their own national interests, even when they're working together. For us, Iran is not a daily existential threat. For Israel, it is a daily existential threat, which will be compounded 1,000 times if Iran gets a nuclear weapon. So it does not surprise me that even though the coordination is as good as it's ever been, far better than when I was the lead planner at CENTCOM, I can understand why there's a divergence in national interests. And at the end of the day, you've got to take care of your national interests rather than your coalition interests.
One of those diverging interests really seems to be the new front that Israel has opened up in Lebanon. And today you have an Israeli opposition leader warning that the Israeli military is stretched to the limits and beyond. Of course, this is coming after those attacks and the conflict in Gaza. This is, they're taking incoming from Iran and now going after the second front in Lebanon. Do you think that Israel can sustain that effort without the United States? And if the United States pulls out, will that essentially end this operation, or do you think Israel will try to continue on its own?
Well, two things. What is happening in Lebanon is separate from what's going on in Iran. Lebanon is a unilateral Israeli operation that is providing ground forces. They are stretched. Israel depends to a great extent on the reserve forces that are only brought on for certain periods of time. So if Israel is stretched, and it could very well be that it is, that's on the land forces. If we pull out and Israel wants to continue the airstrikes into Iran, I don't think we'd pull out completely. I think it would be more like a Ukraine situation where if we pulled out, we'd still be providing intelligence, still be providing support. We just wouldn't have American aircraft in the air.
I'd love for you to put your planner hat on again. As you mentioned, you were the lead planner at CENTCOM a while back. When you hear the president talking, as he did last night, about there being 3,554 targets left in Iran, or that we're just kind of floating over the country looking for whatever we want and we're hitting it, how do you react to that, given the kind of work, the granular work that you supervised when you were at CENTCOM? How do you feel, how comfortable are you with the level of planning that has been done in advance of this military operation, indeed is going on right now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. In a bit of self-promotion, I just wrote an article on this 2 days ago for the National Interest, talking about the Vietnam body count fallacy. I think it's important to understand that we can knock out any target we want, for the most part, inside of Iran, but blowing up stuff does not necessarily equate to strategic victory. The Iranians are not stupid. They have taken a resistance defense, not an active defense. They're saying, we're going to wait out these bombs. We can handle them. We're going to depend not on our military capability, but on the impatience of the American people. So if we can hang in there, just like they did in Afghanistan, just like they did in Vietnam, just as the Israelis have done in Lebanon time after time, they'll eventually tire of this. They'll pull out. And even though we've had a significant amount of destruction, well, that's for the resistance, and we win, they lose. They believe they win by not losing.
Are they right?
I think the fact that we are already talking about political off-ramps, military off-ramps, words like Rubio's, Secretary Rubio, that says it's a matter of weeks. If I was an Iranian in the IRGC planning department, I'd say, let's just put on our helmets and wait till this is going to end. The Americans say they're going to be done in 2 weeks. War will be over, and we can get back to our nuclear program.
I also want to ask you, as somebody who has extensive military experience at CENTCOM and somebody who worked at the State Department, that Poly Military Affairs Bureau, there's some very good folks in there that I've worked with as a reporter over the years. Are you at all concerned about the lack of subject matter experts being brought into these strategy sessions, being brought into these negotiations? You have a very small circle of people. Keep in mind, Marco Rubio is not only Secretary of State, he's also a National Security Council Director. I've talked to some folks at State who are largely not being consulted when it comes to these negotiations. You have Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner leading the way on multiple fronts. Would you like to see the administration rely more on some of these folks who have spent their lives studying this, or do you think they've got it handled?
Well, I also was head of the Middle East Bureau at Department of Defense as well. And I share the concerns that people have expressed by the fact that they're not bringing in the experts. But as long as I see people like Dan Kane as the chairman, I think the military in uniform is going to be okay. Because he has really impressed me throughout this military campaign, not only in terms of his planning, but in terms of his communication with the American people. I do agree with you that there may not be as much advice taken within the State Department, within the National Security Council, and that's pretty much being run by the special envoys. So, yes, there is a concern, but I'd also suggest that watching decades of Middle East negotiations done by the self-appointed experts, and they have gotten nowhere, sometimes you need people that come in and break the glass. Nonetheless, I have been surprised at a couple of the things that are going on with regards to the Iran war. But I think by and large, the experts could have added marginally. But this is not like the crowd that says if they had listened to us, we wouldn't have gone into Iraq. That's just not the case here.